This is an introduction to the basics of ShiftBuilder. ShiftBuilder is a web-based application that's designed to help you come up with the best staffing grid for your particular site. In a separate video, I'll go over the process of how to actually use this application to accomplish this task. In this video, I'll talk only about the basics, meaning what are all the tabs for, what do they show, what do the numbers mean, what are all the knobs and switches, so you're familiar with this web application in general. So when you start the application, it will take a few seconds to load due to the amount of data. And the first tab to come up is this heat map tab. This is supposed to look like something that some of us have used in Excel, where you have a tabular format and there's conditional formatting inside the cells, meaning the colors in the background are correlated to the values inside the cells. Here, the darker the blue, the higher the number, greens are in the middle, and yellows are the low numbers. On the x-axis on the bottom, you see hours of the day, and on the right side, you see the days of the week. So every cell corresponds to some combination of hour of the day and day of the week. But what do the numbers actually mean? So let's look at the filters that give you choices up on top. The first is to pick the site that you're interested in. Default into St. Joseph's Hospital, but you can go into all the facilities, including urgent cares on the bottom. Next is you choose the metric, that is what it is that we're going to measure. Go over those in more detail. Patient arrival has to do with how many patients arrived at that particular combination of hour of the day and day of the week. Similarly, for patient arrival into beds and patient to physician time, pretty self-explanatory. So patients to doc, total number of docs who pick up patients who were picked up by a physician at that particular combination of days of the week and hours of the day. Treated patients is a different concept of a metric. Even though we can see certain number of patients an hour, if there is no throughput through the department and patients board, for example, there's an upper limit of total number of patients that you're able to carry. So if patients don't leave the department and keep consuming resources, all of us have some number that we feel like we can carry safely at one time. Whether it be 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 is different between different providers and the acuity of the patients and the site. But the notion here that when you use this number, you are looking at the total number of treated patients in the department at that time. Next, we move into this EDWU metric. So the idea here is a bit different. It basically is a product of the total number of patients that came in that hour times their acuity at triage, their ESI acuity. The problem with multiplying these two numbers is that they sort of go in different directions. So the sicker the patient, the lower the acuity, and the more patients you come, the larger that number is. So we sort of have to flip the ESI acuity in order to have this product really mean something. So we want high acuity to be high numbers, low acuity to be low numbers. So we take 6 minus the ESI at triage to be the acuity of the patient. So patient with ESI level 1, the sickest, get a score of 6 minus 1 of 5. And the sort of urgent care, least sick patient, med refill would get an acuity level of 1. And then you multiply that by the total number of patients. So for each patient, you calculate the acuity, you add this all up for all the patients that came in that particular hour. So that's useful. It's a combination of both volume and acuity, which is a better reflection of work demand. The limitation is that the relationship is not really linear, right? A patient with an ESI acuity of 1 gets a number 5, and those with ESI of 2 get number 4, and so in this sort of representation, ESI level 1 only requires 20% more work than a level 2, which is not the case because patients with level 1 are crashing and probably easily consume twice as much work resources. So the relationship between this reverse of ESI and actual work is not linear, and we assume it's linear, so it's not perfectly accurate. But what's nice about it is this only requires data from our EHR from Epic. It doesn't require any billing data to arrive at the numbers. So a site like All Saints Hospital, which we did not bill for prior to January 1st, this is likely as good as it gets as far as calculating the total acuity volume for patients coming in. Next is sort of self-explanatory. This comes from billing data, and this is the work RVUs. At least in theory, should be a better representation of the total work demand that the patient put on the staff because supposedly CMS came up with a better formula to assess work. So this is, I think, generally considered to be probably the best that we have. The bottom three formulas, you see uneven, treated, EDW, and RVU, basically take these concepts of total number of treated patients, the ED work unit, and the RVUs, but they distribute them unequally over the course of the patient care. So as we know, if you have a patient who's a level 2 as a chest pain, you go in, you see them, you spend 10, 15 minutes at the bedside, whatever it is, you order some lab tests. Most of the time for the next hour, you'll have very little interaction with the patient unless something happens. And then you have a last bit of time, another 10, 15 minutes, maybe less than that, for the disposition, either discharge instructions, discussions about what was done, lab results, or discussion about why the patient needs to be admitted. At the same time, phone discussions with consultants, with admitting docs. So most of the work is centered in the beginning and the end of the visit. So what this formula does is it takes 40% of the total work, in this case total RVUs for this visit, and it says those RVUs, those 40% were spent in the first 30 minutes of the visit, and then another 40% was spent in the last 30 minutes of the visit, and the rest were spent in the 20% that's left over the rest of the visit. So if you have a 2-hour visit and say the total RVUs are 10, so 40% of that number, 40% of the 10 would be attributed to the first 30 minutes, and then another 40% last 30 minutes. So this is supposed to be a better formula for assessing when are we actually doing the work, and when we add this up over all the patients from the time they're seen by us to the time that we make a disposition decision, this is hopefully going to be the best representation of how we expend work in the department. So it's likely that this uneven RVU is the best we can do as far as estimating as accurately as possible the work demands in the ED. The sort of disadvantage of all these metrics that are more complex than counting patients is that we don't have a good intuitive sense of what they mean. We know what it means to see 2 patients an hour, 3 patients an hour. We don't really necessarily know intuitively what it means to expand 8 RVUs an hour or 12 or 6. And so they're a little bit more elaborate to use accurately in this software. Next are the caps. So the caps are for any particular metric. Let's go back, for example, to patient arrivals. What is the total number that a doc or an APP can see for that particular metric in an hour? And the presumption is this is on a consistent basis for, say, an entire shift. In reality, this is not so easy to arrive at. So, for example, a doctor that's working on an overnight shift at a place like, say, Franklin Hospital is seeing an entire mix of acuity, a lot of patients with very low acuity. Take that same doctor, put them at All Saints Hospital on a PM shift where all the low acuity patients have been kind of flushed away. the total number of patients that you can see per hour is obviously a lot smaller. Your max capacity would be a lot smaller at the All Saints scenario than would be at the overnight Franklin scenario. So there is no magic number. It's also very different provider to provider. Hopefully there'll be some more work in the future to come to a more quote-unquote scientific numbers here based on our actual distribution. For now, we'll use curve matching to arrive at what the caps are, and I'll go over that in a separate video. But suffice it to say that if you put in the numbers that you think are appropriate here, and that's adjustable. The metric divisors are different quantities that you would divide this heat map by. I'll go over that in a second. The percentile is, for example, here we see patient arrivals, and we see the 80th percentile of patient arrivals. So what does that mean? Let's look at St. Joseph's Hospital on Sunday at 3 p.m. The number here is 12.6. That means that over the period of interest here, 20% of the time we saw more than 12.6 patients per hour, and 80% of the time we saw less than 12.6 patients an hour. You can adjust this number to look at different values. 50 would be the median. So here for the same number, for the same combination of weekday and hour, 10 is the median. Typically 80 is a default. I'll go over why we use 80 as a default in the next video. The date range will default into the last quarter, the last 3 months. Data now is updated up to January 30th of this year. In practice, you may not want to use this period. We typically schedule for the next quarter. So if you're looking at scheduling, for example, from June to August, you need to look at a previous year for those dates, since we have seasonal variations. But this is where it defaults to. There's integration of data from Tangier here from our actual schedule, so you need to pick what day, what reference day do you want to pull data from. If you're aware that schedule has changed, then you can look at different dates and see how that affects your data. ESI, you can basically filter particular ESIs. This feature has not been used heavily in the past, but it's available. So basically, say you want to look at St. Joseph's Hospital and you're interested in what patients should be exclusively seen by docs and what those numbers look like, you can filter out the 3, 4, and 5 ESIs and only look at the 1s and 2s, and see that, at the 88th percentile, we see 2 or maybe 3 patients that are level 1 and 2 at any particular combination of hour of the day and day of the week. Exclude financial is here because in the 3rd and 4th tabs we have financial data that I'm presenting. At time you may want to use this application with APPs. I use them to demonstrate the application with customers. We may not want to discuss or reveal specific financial information, so you can exclude the financial data by clicking here. So back to the metric divisors. So now we understand that we're looking at patients per hour, the 80th percentile at different combinations, and we can divide those numbers by the max capacity. So say we decided that number is 2.7, we can see a max of 2.7 patients an hour. So we divided the total number of patients that arrived by the total number of patients per hour that can be seen. And so what do we get as a result? The result is the minimum number of providers that you would need to staff the department at that time. Again, at the 80th percentile, meaning 20% of the time you'd need actually a number that's higher than this. So we peak here at 6.7 providers that would be needed based on these assumptions again. Next, we can divide again by the actual providers on the schedule. So you can click on the second divisor. The color scheme changes. Now white is 1, the blues are higher than 1 and the reds are lower than 1. So what do? We divided the total number of providers that we have before by the actual number of providers that were scheduled. So a number that's lower than 1 means we are overstaffed. We have more providers on the schedule than the 80th percentile calls for. So all the areas in red are hypothetically overstaffed based on this max capacity. All the areas in blue are understaffed, again based on the same principle. What's scheduled provider early stop? This assumes that physicians do not pick up new patients in the last hour of the shift, and APPs don't pick up patients in the last 30 minutes of the shift, so it's a more accurate representation of the number of providers that you have who can actually pick up patients. The builder feature, the fourth tab here, will help you construct a schedule. So once the schedule is constructed, you can look at this heat map and divide the staffed hours by the built schedule. It does the same sort of thing. So here you can get a general sense of how volume and acuity flows through a particular department. Again, you can, to change the periods here, for example, to exclude a month, you can take this forward and say you want to start November 30th. Fairly easy. If you want to go back in time quite a bit, it's probably easier to type 2016 0601. That's one of the earliest dates in the records. May 22nd is the earliest for all facilities except All Saints. So that's an option as well. Again, fairly easy to do when you type in. The next is, again, the next descriptive tab in this software, and now it shows certain combinations of dates and times, just like we saw in the previous histogram, except it shows you exactly what happened at that particular combination. So it starts at Sunday at midnight, but you can switch those around. So say you want to look at Monday at 4 p.m. Switch thing again, 4 p.m. And you have a histogram. So for that entire period of time, you see that one patient, we had one instance where 5 patients showed up at that hour, and then 2 instances where 6 patients showed up, and so on and so on. The median here is 11. And the 80th percentile, which we picked, is 15. So 20% of the time, we'll get more than 15 patients in an hour for Monday at 4 p.m. at St. Joseph's. And 50% of the time, we'll get more than 11 patients. So you can see how the arrivals per hour actually distributed over this quarter. On the bottom, this is not a histogram. This is kind of a scatter plot where you have the dates on the x-axis and the patient arrivals on the y-axis. And the idea here is you can see every Monday, first Monday, second Monday, third Monday, fourth Monday, fifth Monday, how the patient arrivals varied. You have a smoother and approximating line here in blue. This is sort of the best estimate of where the mean lies. Again, it's not exactly the mean, but it's close to. And the gray shaded area shows where the 95% confidence intervals are. So you can see that in this particular instance, everything is within the confidence intervals. You could do things differently. Instead of looking at a combination of a day and a weekday, you can look at only at a particular hour. For example, you could look at 4 p.m. over every day of the week. So that gives you a snapshot of how things look like at 4 p.m. Vice versa, you can look at only Monday and see how things look like on Monday on average. Try to better understand the flow. Actually, going back earlier here, I do need to note that the right column represents the daily totals, actually 80th percentile of the daily totals. And the bottom row, which is called overall, represents the 80th percentile. Here, the 80th percentile of arrivals at 8 a.m. So taking all the days of the week together. I need to warn you that if you calculate the average of these numbers, you will not get this number, because the median of the medians is not the median. I know that sounds confusing, but basically this number needs to be somewhere in between the lowest number here and the highest number here, but not the average. Okay, so these are the details screens, and again, those are just designed to give you a description of flow through the department. Next comes the advisor screen. So this is where we start matching supply and demand. You have the shifts for the particular Tangier date right here on the left side. Provider type, start time, end time. Next comes a graph, which is sort of the operating graph for ShiftBuilder. In black, we see the demand line. So here in this case, patient arrivals per hour for different hours of the day. Midnight, 0 hours, all the way to 11 p.m. to midnight. So over the entire 24 hours, and we see how the 80th percentile of patient arrivals varies. Again, you can change this and look at the median if you wish. You'll see the line goes down. We'll look at 80th percentile. Same like the heat map, we see here that at AM, 80th percentile is somewhere around 12 patients per hour. So what are the bars? The bars take the max capacity for docs and APPs that you put in, that you decided is appropriate, and multiplies by the total number of providers staffing at that time. So at 7 a.m. or say 6 a.m. you have 1 docs who can see 2.7 patients an hour, hypothetically, and 2 APPs who can both see 2.7 patients an hour. Add it all together and you get the total capacity, the total supply for the metric, in this case patients per hour, that you have available. In this case, it exceeds the 80th percentile demand. So that means that you should be able to handle patients coming in well over the 80th percentile in this scenario. The shaded region is the one we're interested in, areas actually where bars go above and below the black line. Ideally, you want to match those as well as you possibly could. Shaded region are instances in which you have under capacity. You don't have enough supply for the demand that's coming in. Those are areas that you would need to adjust by increasing the total number of providers. Okay, so again, bars over the black line, you have oversupply of staffing. Shaded region, undersupply of staffing. The white sort of dashed or dotted lines mean staggered departures. So because people stop seeing patients before they leave, it's not ideal to have multiple people leave the department at the same time. And so the percent of people that leave from the total is meaningful. Here, all 3 providers from the night leave at the same time. Here at 2 p.m., 2 providers leave. Here at 10 p.m., 3 providers leave. At 11, 2 providers leave. The goal is, if possible, to have those departures stagger. So not if 1 provider or less leave at any particular hour, then those white lines disappear. The cyan or light blue dotted line is the ratio of APPs to docs that you decide is appropriate. So a different group than EMS might decide that they're going to have light use of APPs and might decide that they're never going to staff more than 1 APP with a doctor, and so they would set this number at 1 max APP per doc. For us, it's different. We're comfortable with higher APP to doc ratios. So this is the max number, and the solid cyan line is what is the actual APP to doc ratio at different times of the day. And now you're ever exceeding it. So here we're slightly exceeding it at 11 p.m. is the only time. You'll note here that all the filters are roughly the same with the exception of all the financial data. So you need to make assumptions about the doc base rate. Docs with EMS are bonus based on shifts and APPs based on hours. So all that is in there based on sort of best assessment for financial performance for 2018. Again, if you would have picked exclude financial prior to going to this tab, you'd see all this information disappears and you're not presenting any financial data. So you can change these assumptions. All these boxes are dynamic once the numbers change. Here on the bottom, we see tabular data. Let's start with this table, just total number of day, night hours, and total hours by APPs and docs in total. So here 111 hours for the St. Joseph schedule per day and 72 APP hours. Here the score systems are basically there to help you create better schedules and understand if this is a good schedule. The daily census per doc hour is basically total number of patients arriving in a 24-hour period divided by the total number of doctors. The covered score. So it basically is the sum of all the areas that where the bars are above the black line and those that are shaded, added all together and then divided by the total area under the black line. So multiply by 100. So what's the idea here? If the bars and the line match perfectly, your covered score will be 100. If the mismatch either above or below the line, if the bars are either above or below, then you'll have areas that take away from 100, and the closer you get to 100, the better match you have as far as supply and demand. Here it says that if you were to change your APP caps and doc caps, change the assumptions, you can reach a hypothetical score of 93.60. We'll see what that means in a future video. The financial score has to do with the total cost of this particular schedule divided by the optimal cost based on an optimal coverage, and the closer you are to 100, the better off we are. The stagger score would be close to 100 when nobody staggers, and the more people you have, multiple people leaving at the same time, the lower the score would be. This tabular data basically shows you the financial performance of this particular schedule. So multiplies all the rates that you see above for shifts, for hours, by the total number of days. This is total calculation for the year. And then you get to staff APPs for their daily hours, 1.8 million for St. Joseph's Hospital. Bonuses for APPs, for docs, end up with a total annual cost of $5,329,000 for St. Joe's based on the above assumptions. We'll see later where this is useful. Again, if you click exclude financial, this all disappears. Things I haven't shown you so far are show schedule and pick day. So right now you're seeing every day over the period of interest, so that's a total of 92 days. Sometimes, or in the future, we may want to start scheduling differently at different days. So weekend versus weekday schedule. For example, here we're looking at weekdays, and we can schedule separately Monday through Friday. Then we do weekend. We can do weekend. We'll need to delete this. And this is how the weekend demand curve looks like. If the Tangier date is not pointing to a weekend day and the schedule is different, you'd need to pick a different date. So here we're pointing to Sunday, no problem. At some point in the future, we may be able to do daily scheduling, meaning optimizing for particular days of the week. Here we're looking at Mondays, Tuesday, and so on. We now also have the ability to do holiday scheduling. This is not so much about saving money, but more about wellness. If we don't need as many people working the holidays, that's great. So picking Thanksgiving, for example, we can see that over this period, October of last year, end of October to end of January, we only have 1 day of Thanksgiving, so it's quite noisy data. But we see for that particular day, we were heavily overstaffed. Okay, so let's go back and do this for 2016. And now we have 2 Thanksgiving days, and still a little bit noisy, but still shows that we're overstaffed. Let's add Christmas Day. Sorry, that's not New Year's Eve, Christmas Day. Now we have 4 days we're looking at, maybe slightly less noisy, still overstaffed, so shows that we have an opportunity to reduce staffing on holidays at this particular site. Later we'll go over how to actually adjust the schedule. So here we can, again, here we can pick multiple instances. The assumption here that Christmas and Thanksgiving are roughly kind of the same as far as flow. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but grouping more days together like this can lead to somewhat more reliable data, so we don't make assumptions and then end up with a really busy day. These are all the holidays available from New Year's Eve to New Year's Day. This is the first New Year's Eve day, and this is the last day of the year, New Year's Eve. Okay, back to all. Next comes the builder. The builder is the tab that allows you to actually change the schedule to get better fit for the volume that comes in. So here you have sort of a grid where you put in the provider type, the start time, the end time, and once you make changes, you can submit those. You need to click the submit button, and then you see this black demand curve just like before, and the bars representing your supply. And the whole idea here is you need to fill this graph with these squares until it's complete and you have a coverage score that's good. As you do this, you have sort of comparison. So we started with a Tangier coverage score of 74.5. Right now we're at 20, so we're doing much worse. That's expected. We only have 1 shift in there. Similarly, the financial score is really high. We're doing really well, but we're not staffing. There's nobody staggering. So you can sort of see these are the scores for the builder schedule building, and these are sort of the benchmark that you want to improve on. Likewise, financially, these 2 rows are the builder cost. So having a single shift at Joe's over the year costs $657,000. These 3 rows, these 3 rows are the existing Tangier costs, and this row is the difference. So if we could staff St. Joseph's Hospital with a single doc shift a day, we would save $4.6 million. You get the idea. Okay, so what do you do with this? The whole notion is you build this step by step. So I'll show you how to build schedules later, but I'll just give you a demo. You don't need to put doc in. It's enough to put D for doctor. And then start time, you can use 15 for 3 p.m. and 22 for 10 p.m. and that's going to add a separate shift. I believe that 10 p.m. will also work this way and 6 a.m. will also work this way. Let's see. No, it doesn't. Let's see this. Looks more promising. So we need to enter the whole AM and PM. And then it builds sort of the first layer of docs. We'll go over later about actual construction of a schedule. What else can we do with this? You can load the schedule from Tangier. So you can, let's submit this. So you can see exactly how things are looking based on the Tangier schedule, or you can clear this entire thing and start from scratch again. The other thing you can do once you have a schedule in there, say you changed it, is you can save it. You click Save Build, and it brings up a little screen for you to save a CSV file, which you can then load into Excel. One more thing to show you here is you have this display optimal coverage. So what does this do? This is sort of a helper. It basically says it tries to maximize the number of APPs for the number of docs based on the threshold that you set in the previous screen, meaning 2.5. And it tries to build sort of a coverage pattern that's a best fit. And you can if you wish, follow this pattern. So, with the numbers we have, even though you don't really tell the software what to do, it decides that it's St. Joseph's Hospital. If you were to schedule the same way every day of the year, you need double coverage from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., which is, lo and behold, what we actually do. So it actually can be pretty helpful as far as building the schedule, and I'll show you in the next video exactly how we do this in practice. So this covers the basics. In the next video, we'll go over more detail as to how to use this to actually understand inefficiencies in the schedule and build a new schedule.